السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس جمهورية مصر العربية.
His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس الجمهورية.
Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, you young people who arrived to the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, you're most welcome. We are around 500 million around the world who in fact fell under the poverty line due to the circumstances in the coming years. This according to the indicators of the World Bank. Within this framework, and the pandemic in fact exhausted the health sector around the world, besides a financial crisis around the world, which is described being the worst. And the pandemic as well, in fact, unveiled the crisis of inequality in enjoying the basic services, good healthcare, basic education, infrastructure with high quality. This, in fact, which threatened the expansion of the gaps between the different communities. If, in fact, poverty and it's increasing, and it's our, in fact, unfortunately, the African continent suffered a lot. The international estimations that the world in 2021 witnessed the presence of 66% those who are living abject poverty around the world, South Sahara in the African continent. You can imagine the severity of this figures for those who are living in abject poverty and living in a sector in our continent, the Sahara. And besides the suffering, the deterioration in the health sector that have been suffered by a number of African countries, beside the inequality in having the vaccine of the pandemic, in fact, these indicators, in fact, shows the real need of the African continent and the equal demand that we have been calling upon, on top of which is Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and to restructure the debts, in fact, that's considered a burden on the shoulders of these states and to be rescheduled or to be deleted. Africa deserves that in harmony with the economic situation that are being lived in most of the African countries post the pandemic. The change of the poverty indicators imposed, in fact, to expand the umbrella of social protection and to increase the pace of developmental initiatives in order to reach to the needed, in fact, targets to create prosperity and welfare and to reduce poverty indicators and poverty rates. In this fourth edition of the forum, to allocate a discussion panel discussing horizons of development to reduce poverty rates. What are the efforts exerted, needed by governments in order to increase economic indicators as, in fact, poverty will threaten the survival of the planet? What can we do within the framework of this expanded horizon? This is what I'm calling you to share me in welcoming Her Excellency Dr. Hala Al-Saeed, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development. Elena Panova, the UN Resident Coordinated. Mr. Hassan Bouazza, the head of the Volunteer Arab Association. Mrs. Aya Omar, the president of Haya Karima, which is in fact achieving the dream that we are all dreaming here in Egypt. Mr. Stephanie, the representative of BEAM, providing services for the displaced. Welcome, Alex. Sarah El-Batouti, Architect founder, eConsult founder. Michaela Sisney, the independent consultant and founder at Prime Global, supporting for the children with disability. Welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, the Minister, they always see from the womb of suffering, hope is created. The role, what is the role needed to be played by the government in order to reduce poverty rates? His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, it gives me great pleasure to meet you and to participate in this important session of the Youth World Forum, which is considered an important platform. In fact, when we talk about poverty indicators and the ruling framework at the international level, how we will be tackling poverty issue. The International Agenda of Sustainable Development 2020 and the African Agenda 2063 and the Egypt Agenda 2030, which is the national edition of the national objective, which is in line with the Africa Agenda 2063. They all agree on the importance of poverty and poverty dimension and how it affects developmental indicators. Hence, it's important to eradicate poverty with all its forms. When we talk about developmental experiences, how the world used to look at poverty and what are the development introduced at the concept of poverty, we always look at the income level of per capita income level. And in fact, with the development of indicators and the development of the different definitions, we started to look to the different standards of living and different dimensions in measuring poverty indicators. We look at education indicators, health indicators, and basic services indicators that, in fact, individuals enjoy in any country, and this have been called by the United Nations multidimensional poverty. When I look to the education indicators and the dropout from education and the percentage of those who are joining the primary and elementary and secondary education. When I look today at the levels of health, today we see the level of health services and nutrition. When I look at the indicators of standards of living enjoyed by the individuals, we look at the basic services, sanitation, clean water, electricity, roads network, in addition to the average income, and which in fact form the definition of the multi-dimensional poverty indicator. We would like to look and to understand when the pandemic happened, how, in fact, did it affect the indicators of poverty? Pandemic, as said by Mr. Ahmed, is the biggest economic crisis in the world and in the modern century. Why we say it's the biggest economic crisis, as the previous crisis and even economic recession that happened in the 1920, it was either crisis related to specific sector, a financial crisis and the crisis of debts, or it is related to specific areas, as crisis happened in Latin America and in Asia. The crisis here started by a health crisis and affected the whole humanity. Hence, today it spread from one area to another. Hence, it affected all economic aspects. It affected on supply and demand. on the buyer and the seller. Hence, this led to the deterioration in the movement of trade, which is estimated from 40 up to 70%, severe reduction in rates of investment, and also led to turbulences in labor market. And as all of this is related to employment and labor market, and also a very serious matter, the turbulences of education movements. Today, individuals who in fact suffered in the education system turbulences, around 30,000 individuals from 2020 till the end of 2021. We are also talking about the impact of this on the average unemployment rates. We are talking about more than 255 million jobs will be lost by the end of this year. We are talking about 250 million citizens by the end of 2022 will be, in fact, going through different levels of poverty rates, and hence many implications due to the pandemic that affected the whole world and humanity in general. How did the different countries dealt with this crisis? In fact, we can't say that we have that there was a standardized, in fact, way of dealing with this crisis. Each and every country dealt with the crisis according to its economic advancement, its capabilities, and the demographic structure. In fact, health crisis affects severely and significantly, in fact, on the population and their structure. Hence, there was, in fact, a wide gap and disparity in dealing with this crisis according to these different criteria. Hence, uncertainty, in fact, which is related to health crisis and the different and the species that are mutating, affects majorly on the crisis. The Egyptian developmental experience, where did it stand from this crisis? We would like to underscore that Egypt is following a very important principle, which is the right to development as an inherent right of the human rights, and this and the strategy that was launched by Excellency the President 2060, the Egypt's Vision 2030, was built upon this. In order to achieve economic development, I will not be able to achieve such without bearing in mind the social dimension and the vulnerable people, and to integrate the disabled persons, and I will not be able to achieve economic and social development without bearing in mind the environmental dimension, to preserve the rights of the coming generations in preserving their natural resources. It's very important as well to reiterate that this has been reiterated in the strategy launched by His Excellency the President in the mid of 2020, which is the National Strategy for Human Rights, that reiterated on the civil, political, social, and economic rights, and the rights of women and children. In this system, when the pandemic happened, we had the strategic orientation directed by His Excellency the President to create the balance between preserving the lives and the health of people while taking precautionary measures, and at the same time to continue the economic development and economic growth. This was the direction and the orientation of the Egyptian state, and we in fact dealt with this crisis at the beginning. We supported a quick support to the sectors who were negatively affected by the pandemic. We have sectors that were suspended due to the economic repercussions, and like the aviation sector, the tourism sector, and also small and medium enterprises sector. Hence, we supported. It was supported by a number of financial packages. We supported this sector in terms of facilitations in payments and in rescheduling their debts and in providing and giving some concessional loans in order to operate and to preserve these entities. The second, in fact, pillar is to rearrange our priorities. The crisis, in fact, led the whole world to rearrange their, in fact, schedules, and we started from the investments to invest in education and health sector, and those who are able to adapt with crisis, like the telecommunication sector, agriculture sector, we in fact pumped investments 300% at that time. Third, which is supporting the Egyptian citizen. The Egyptian state, in fact, for the first time, provided presidential grants for irregular employment, and a number of people, in fact, got this grant for 6 months. We increased the pension and the wages and salaries. Why we did all that? While a number of countries, in fact, were not able to do or to apply this, as we were keen to preserve economic and institutional entities. This was our core, and this was the social safety network that we are all keen to preserve it. This was the short-term policy and the plan, and this was the way that the Egyptian government dealt with the economic crisis related to the pandemic. The second, in fact, pillar was the medium term, is to accelerate to improve quality of life in the Egyptian rural areas and to accelerate the initiative Haya Karima, or Decent Life, which is a practical application for the multi-dimensional poverty indicator. And this, we, in fact, according to this indicator, we are required to improve the quality of life in the rural areas, in the villages. We have 58 million citizens in and we are talking about infrastructure and services, infrastructure, electricity, road network. We are talking about schools, classrooms, decent housing, human development, vocational training, job opportunities, and this will guarantee sustainability of development efforts and to provide job opportunities in these villages. Investments that amount up to 45 to 50 million US dollars, in fact, allocated for these initiatives. Among the important positive indicators in the developmental plan, for the first time we have a reduction in the increasing rates of children who are, in fact, who joined the education system. It was very important in the preliminary phase, which we started in Haya Karima. It was 375 villages, and its poverty indicator were reduced till 14% in many of the villages. And in this preliminary phase, in fact, we didn't use to provide all these services that we are doing now and providing it in Haya Karima. In fact, we have quite an experience, a pioneering experience. We are talking about 375 unsafe areas where we are for the first time providing all basic services in order to create a healthy citizen who is able to deal with the Egyptian society. And it's also worth mentioning that Egypt is the first country in the Middle East and in the Arab region that took measures bearing in mind the needs of women during the pandemic. We are the first countries at the Arab region level and the Middle East who took the measures bearing in mind the pandemic.
I can't speak about poverty indicators without tackling the issue of population, the issue of population and how the population increase impacts poverty. And this is why the developmental initiative that His Excellency the President will be announcing in a few days is that of the development of the Egyptian family. It has two objectives. First, to regulate the rapidly increasing rates of population, and second, to improve the quality and the characteristics of the population in terms of nutrition, women's health, because it's important to say that when we speak of poverty, it's important to say that 48% of the families that include women and 6 children are poor, and 40% of those who live within families of 10 persons or 10 individuals are poor. And this, of course, emphasizes the relation between poverty and the population increase. And here comes the role of women empowerment, as well as all the services that have to do with women's health, whether it comes to nutrition, education, awareness raising, or other services as well, in order to regulate the population increase. I would like to conclude with a message to youth that all the developmental initiatives all these initiatives are undertaken by the state, but however, the real poverty is poverty of skills. So education does not stop at a certain age. The Egyptian state provides access to a lot of educational and training courses. We have the academy established by His Excellency the President, especially for training youth on leadership and to provide them with relevant skills. There are lots of institutions that train youth through certain programs. So please take all these chances for continued education and training, because the more capacities that I have, the more opportunities and choices that I have. And our skills and capacities open the doors in front of me. And so here, this is a platform for capacity building, because there are all the executive leaders around here with us. So I think the political leadership headed by His Excellency the President, his being present here along with the youth locally and internationally, actually allows for capacity building and the building of a strong character that is capable of tackling different challenges. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hala Said. Now I ask Ms. Elena Panova. Dr. Hala said that the right to development is a main human right. So if the UN does realize that increasing poverty is an international crisis, it does not have to do with developing nations, and that's it. So what can the UN offer to support these developing nations or to support any developmental initiatives in order to reduce poverty rates?
Your Excellency, President El-Sisi, distinguished panel members, as Dr. Hala mentioned, poverty alleviation is at the core of all development agendas. The global agenda, African agenda, and also national agenda. Much before the pandemic hit us, in the 2030 agenda, the global agenda, Goal 1, which is focused on poverty, recognized that ending poverty in all its forms everywhere will be and is still the greatest challenge facing the world. When pandemic and COVID-19 hit us, it became very clear and very quickly that it's not just a health crisis, it's a developmental crisis. And the ones that were suffering most are the poor people. because for them, the crisis became a double crisis. First, they have the highest risk of exposure to the virus, and second, least access to quality healthcare. And here I'm talking more globally. Recent estimates, and that was already mentioned in the previous speakers, estimates show that COVID-19 pandemic increased global poverty by as much as 500 million people, or 80%, 8% of the total human population. If we look only at the last year the pandemic pushed up to 120 million people into extreme poverty. And that was the first increase in decades. The uneven recovery has further deepened inequalities between the global north and the south. And the United Nations Secretary General speaks a lot about this. He speaks about the fact that solidarity is missing in action. And this is just when it's needed most. So how do we build forward better? And there was a question from the moderator, Dr. Ahmed. What should the governments do? I would like to emphasize on three main approaches. And also mention that the intervention of Dr. Hala very clearly outlined that the government of Egypt has been acting along those three main approaches. First, the recovery must be transformative, because we cannot go back to endemic structural disadvantages and inequalities that perpetuated poverty even before the pandemic. And here I would like to mention the bold and commend the bold actions of the government of Egypt of launching the second wave of the structural reforms and taking the opportunity of the pandemic to build forward better. The United Nations will work very closely with the government and partner with the government for the implementation of the structural reforms. Because the structural reforms will focus on job creation, and this is what we need. They will focus on unleashing the potential of the private sector, on increasing the productivity and manufacturing, and they will promote greater equality. Second, the recovery must be inclusive, because an uneven recovery is leaving much of the humanity behind, increasing the vulnerability of already marginalized groups. And here I would like to give a very simple example so that we understand, what the inclusivity means. And the example is about Africa. Even before pandemic, the 22 richest men in the world had more wealth than all women in Africa. And that gap has only grown with the pandemic. Third, recovery must be sustainable, because we need to build a resilient, decarbonized, and net zero world. And here the proactive approach of the government of Egypt is very much welcomed. Through it all, we need to listen far more to the views and the guidance of the people living in poverty, addressing indignities and dismantle barriers to inclusion in our societies. But let's look at the positive side. We already see examples from around the world of innovative ideas and also initiatives that responded to the pandemic. This included efforts at global level to strengthen international cooperation and also renewed solidarities. There are many examples, but it also includes homegrown initiatives, including example here from Egypt, that can support the vulnerable population. I would like to concentrate very quickly on two examples, on two approaches, which are very important in the recovery and building forward better. First, ensuring sustainable financing. We all recognize the need to scale up available financing to recover from COVID-19, salvage the SDGs, and also create a green future. In many countries, fiscal space has tightened as available domestic resources have declined. Many countries' responses to the emergency were regretfully financed by increasing their debts, including non-concessional debts. The World Bank, and that was mentioned, estimates that since the pandemic, public debt in low and middle income countries increased to its highest level in the last 50 years. Therefore, the United Nations Secretary General has called for a renewed commitment to debt relief that would include an extension and expansion of the G20's debt service suspension initiative. This means giving access to all countries that need it, including middle-income countries, which are home of 60% of the world's poor. And that's why the call of His Excellency, the President, and also the African leaders on the debt relief will be supported by the UN and is extremely important in these dire times. But suspension to debt payments alone will not be enough to support countries in need. What we need is comprehensive, sustainable development financing strategy. And they need to fill the gap and reorient public and private investments towards the SDGs, and specifically SDGs that are linked to inequalities. To kickstart these efforts, the UN launched, and this is a response to your question, a global joint SDG fund, which the aim to close this financial gap. Here in Egypt, 5 UN organizations, ILO, UNCTAD, UNDP, UNICEF, and UN Women, are jointly implementing in very close collaboration with the government of Egypt a joint program that is funded by this fund to support the development of Egypt's first SDG financing strategy. Through this work, we will first estimate how much the SDGs will cost, certain SDGs, the ones that are linked to people, how much of our current financing flows go towards these SDGs, and what are the new opportunities, and Dr. Sala was talking about this, new innovative financing like green bonds, gender bonds, overall SDG bonds are needed so that we can close the gap. Second point, and with this I will finish my intervention, this is leaving no one behind, which is at the heart of the right for development that was mentioned and highly promoted by Egypt. With regards to leaving no one behind, it is central transformative promise of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. It represents, in a way, a commitment of the member states to eradicate poverty. Practical approaches to leaving no one behind are things like localization of the SDGs. An emphasis on SDGs localization can help all of us ensure that needs of the local people are represented in the governmental plans. Egypt has been pioneering the work of the SDG localization in the regions with the recent developments of 27 reports. These reports provide overview of the development situation, but they also help the government and all of us to build on the current opportunities and strategically use data to plan and deliver high-impact interventions. Another example that was mentioned, and we will continue mentioning, the country's commitment to the localization of the SDGs is also clearly demonstrated through the Hayek Arima.
Sayyidah Elena?
Yes.
Excuse me.
I will finish here. I will finish here. I will just say that this homegrown initiative represents an outstanding opportunity to alleviate poverty and inequality, and we as the United Nations are by the side of the government in supporting successful implementation. Because when the government succeeds with Haya Karima, it will succeed with the implementation of the SDGs. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لك السيدة إلينا بنوبة. السيدة إلينا قبل أن نصعد إلى المنصة وعدتني
Miss Elena, before coming to the podium, said that she will stick to 4 to 5 minutes, but obviously she tricked me. And I just hope that we can all stick to the allotted time to us in order to avoid any interruptions. Sheikh Hassan Bouhazza, head of the Arab Union. What does volunteering mean in our Arab region so that we can go ahead with it in our initiatives to reduce poverty levels? In the name of Allah, most merciful, most gracious, in the Quran, Allah says, enter Egypt in peace and in safety. May God keep Egypt as an oasis of peace and safety. Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, it gives me great pleasure to congratulate you on the success of the World Youth Forum. I would also like to thank the organizing committee for their hospitality and their excellent organization. In fact, poverty in the whole world, and according to the UN statistics and reports, all these point out to having 1.3 billion people suffering from poverty. Fifth of the world's population live on $3.2 US per day. Also, 2/5 of the world's population live on 5.5%, $5.5 US daily. In fact, these are horrible figures, and poverty impacts all states' efforts. The pandemic has also had a huge impact. According to UN figures, there are 88 to 100 million people who have been negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic. There is no doubt that state efforts alone are not enough. I mean, states, it was necessary for efforts to come together, whether private, public, or NGO efforts. And this is why there needs to be some participation in order or contribution to actually alleviate the impact of poverty and the pandemic on the most vulnerable. And the biggest initiative that managed to bring both private and public sectors together, as well as NGOs' efforts, is Haya Karima. This presidential initiative that achieved the hard equation of actually alleviating poverty in 60 million on the scale of 60 million people. We all are impressed by this incredible initiative that managed to strengthen health, provide decent nutrition and housing. And in the Arab Union for volunteers, we would be really pleased to be able to take part in this initiative, and we can be ambassadors to promote in different Arab countries to promote this initiative in order to help our states adopt similar initiatives. In fact, I am very, very impressed by the Egyptian experience and by the presidential initiatives of His Excellency the President and the keen attention he gives to civil society organizations and NGOs. The best example to that is announcing the year 2022 as the civil society year, and this is actually a very good example on the faith of the Egyptian government and their belief in NGOs and volunteers and the role in development and community development at large. In the Arab Union for Volunteers,
we found out that having volunteers and the participation of the volunteers are extremely important. And as per the statistics of the United Nations, there are 9 million volunteers in our Arab worlds, and they are equal to 8.2% of the whole number of the volunteers throughout the globe. A very modest percentage. We are ambitious to have larger numbers. Therefore, the Arab Union for Volunteers is working on 2 main pillars. Pillar number 1 is to polarize and attract more members, supporting them, motivating them to exercise the volunteership. And the second pillar is the training and capacity building, to attract members, to build their capacities and to train them, is being carried out through providing prizes and awards. And we have an award named after Sheikh Ali Al Khalifa to honor the volunteers in the Arab world. This award aims at highlighting the best examples and best role models of the volunteers in our Arab world. The influential models who have dedicated their time for voluntary work. We also have another award, which is the Medal of His Highness Prince Mohammed bin Fahd, that is rewarded after a global competition through which we outreach to the biggest number of the voluntary teams. This award or this medal comes to different sectors: health, water, education, environment, and improvement of livelihood, as well as social marketing. The main target of this medal is to alleviate poverty and to assist the volunteers teams to adopt better approaches that would help alleviating poverty. Another aspect of our vision in the Union is to train and build the capacities of the volunteers so they can be ready to provide help in the humanitarian work in our Arab nations. This takes place through seminars, conferences and workshops conducted by the Union. It's worth noting that out of the most important programs we carry out the important workshops here in Egypt under the sponsorship of the Ministry of Youth and Sports. Sheikh Hassan, you mentioned the role of the Arab youth and the volunteers' role. That are the pillars that we are going to address right now. You can imagine, dear guests, that an experience is based on a national project in a single track, as big as the expenditure is or as large as the beneficiaries are. It would be a great project, since we are suffering as a nation in the number of the villages that enjoy sanitation. Therefore, the coverage as well of the natural gas pipes and utilities as well as clean water. Can you imagine that we have launched all of these projects throughout all the tracks in a single track that is called the National Project for the Development of the Egyptian Countryside, Hayat Karima or Decent Life? Well, we are going to watch now a short film to highlight the main pillars of decent life with the expenditure of more than 700 billion Egyptian pounds.
تصوروا ان احنا في مصر ان شاء الله خلال ال3 سنوات القادمة دول ان احنا نقدر نحول حياة 58 مليون مصري.
من 1948 والعالم بيتكلم لغة حقوق الإنسان، وطول السنين والعالم بيسأل إيه أكتر حق بيخلي كل واحد فينا إنسان؟ قدرتنا على تحديد مصيرنا بتتوقف على إننا نعيش بأمان في أحسن صحة وعندنا علم ووعي بيحركوا تصرفاتنا في الاتجاه الصح. توفير احتياجاتنا الأساسية هي الضامن لعيشتنا بحرية، وده أصل كونك إنسان، ده أصل حياة كريمة. الأهم من إنك تحلم إنك تكون جريء وإنت بترسم أحلامك، وحياة كريمة مشروع بيأكد قد إيه كان عندنا الجرأة وإحنا بنحلم، لأن لأول مرة مشروع يكون هدفه إن التنمية توصل لأكتر من نص سكان مصر.
The biggest developmental project throughout the modern history of Egypt, as well as the most humane project. It started with the ideas of youth dreaming of a better future for Egypt with Egyptian hands and Egyptian mind. The initiative has turned into a national project. With its success, it is becoming a role model. We are going to get to centers with the villages, with all its centers and subsidiary entities. Decent Life is going to provide sanitation, drinking water, electricity utilities, as well as housing. We are going to pave the roads, introduce the telecommunication infrastructure. This is a promise, not from me, from the state of Egypt. Eradicating poverty is a target that is in line with the SDGs. It is on the top of our agenda. The initiative of Hayat Karima provided housing services, educational and health services, provided better environment for all the labor hands, all in line with the human rights that matches the United Nations directives and provisions. That is not only words. Previously, there was a wide gap between the countryside and the urban side. Now we are closing this gap based on information, science, and data, surveys and scans that is conducted by 21,000 volunteers. I'm proud to be part of Decent Life initiative. I'm proud of Hayat Karima. I'm proud to volunteer in Decent Life. I'm proud that in Hayat Karima we are pleasing our families and our peoples. I am proud that I'm part of Hayat Karima. Hayat Karima is an initiative that embodied its names. The people are working like in a beehive. It is a comprehensive developmental plan to make shift of the society, the politics, the economy, and everything. All the seniors, all the breadwinning women, all the young men and women who are looking for better opportunities. We have intervened with the poorest countries with poverty rates that exceeded 70%. We targeted 375,000 villages, and in the first phase that being implemented right now targets 1,436 villages in 20 governorates with beneficiaries, 18.5 million beneficiaries, agreed on creating a comprehensive environment for all the beneficiaries. Hayat Karima provides a comprehensive, holistic project to create a man that will serve his or her nation, protected and safeguarded from extremism, and citizen who knows the destiny of his nation and feels the appreciation and the value he enjoys in his country. We also developed the infrastructure because without health, we have improved the quality of the health units, providing health units to make surgeries for all the beneficiaries, to creating an awareness, providing literacy program for the digital world as well. We also paid attention to the training and requalification, providing training centers for the handicrafts for men and women of the countryside and for the differently abled people. We participated in small and micro projects, amongst which we did not forget about the youth centers and sports center and all the activities that are related to the environment preservation. Hundreds of hands have been extended to help and assist. We have carried out a number of initiatives in Corona times, Radi Jamil, Tasaluh, and Hayat, providing solutions and assistance in very difficult times. We have reached out to Aswan to support our people during the floods. We have rebuilt the damaged houses, and we sent lots of humanitarian convoys to Aswan to help the people. When we had the floods here in Aswan, I thought that it's the Armageddon. It was disastrous. We were speechless. Children are running everywhere. Women are running everywhere. It was a distress. From east to west, Hayat Karima is redrawing the map of Egypt. We are helping the humans of Egypt to provide them life in dignity. Much has been done, less to be done. Tahya Masr, long live Egypt, an achievement that is not unique and not new to us. We are going to carry on until we achieve our miracles as aspired. I will give the floor now to Aya Omar, the head of Decent Life Institution. Aya, the film depicted many aspects of Hayat life that is not targeting better livelihood, but rather different life altogether. So what is different, what is new with Hayat Karima to provide in bullet points? At the beginning, I wish to welcome His Excellency the President and all the dear guests. I wish to express my pride in being part of Hayat Karima and one of the youth who provided the vision of this national project to His Excellency the President. Now we are a youth institution, an umbrella for all the volunteers, including 21,000 volunteers in the times of the pandemic that affected the globe. Yet that was a trigger for us to start more actions to alleviate the ravages of the pandemic, especially for the poor people, through Decent Life Initiative. As you have seen in the video, I don't want to bother you with much details. The video showed to you that we have helped millions throughout the different cities and governorates of Egypt. We have provided all the services that would fulfill all the needs of the Egyptian citizens. This is our message as youth from the World Youth Forum to all countries. We believe that we can and we must start comprehensive development throughout all the corners of Egypt through a national project that addresses infrastructure, economic empowerment, decent housing, social interventions, humanitarian interventions for all the people in need. As Her Excellency Minister Hala Saeed mentioned and as Dr. Elena Benova mentioned, these are in line with the SDGs. And the national project have crossroads with the SDGs and the United Nations directives. This is the biggest mega project in the modern history of Egypt because it targets a transformation of livelihoods of 58 million Egyptian citizens. For the first time, the efforts of the Egyptian state are being unified with the development partnerships inside and outside Egypt, civil society, NGOs, volunteers, international and regional institutions as well. The project at the beginning targeted the multi-layered poverty and filling the gaps in development between the cities and the urban and countrysides and creating a sustainable livelihood for all the citizens and promoting the citizenship values throughout Egypt and promoting the economic, social, livelihood, environmental life of all the families. That has been done based on the selection of clear criteria to put into consideration the poverty percentage in the selected areas, as well as considering the literacy rates and the number of breadwinning women in all the cities and villages. Also, in all these centers, we rather focused on the economic empowerment by creating more and better opportunities through providing sustainable development and trainings for the craftsmanship and the handicrafts. As the minister mentioned, we target more than 4,000 villages in 175 markers or centers throughout Egypt, and now we are working on 1,436 villages, and we have started the mega projects in all these centers, and we paying special attention to the neediest and poorest groups such as orphans, breadwinning seniors, unemployed, people of determination. And this is our experience. Our experience combine the youth empowerment in unprecedented way. This is the first time to see this magnitude of youth empowerment, as well as having the political will to push ahead all the youth to perform their roles throughout all the corners and notches of Egypt. I thank from the bottom of my heart the decision makers for giving us this opportunity and to be part of this mega project. Thank you. Thank you very much, Aya, and thank you for being punctual. I will move now to Alex Stephanie, the Beam CEO, which is a digital platform to provide support for the homeless as a model of the linkage between civil society and governments. How was your experience, Alex?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me here. This is my first time in Egypt. It's very interesting to learn more about the work that you are doing to lift up the poorest people in your country, which is, of course, a critical job. And I work on lifting up the poorest in my country, which is the UK. I'm also not surprised to hear that this idea came from the young people in your country. Yesterday evening, I was at the evening activities for the World Youth Forum. And the ambition, the positive energy, the intelligence of the young people I was meeting and speaking to at yesterday's events was impressive and very inspiring. 4 years ago, I became friends with a very, very poor person in London, and he was a man who was sleeping on the streets of London. And I would buy him cups of coffee, I would speak to him, I would try to help him. But his condition went worse to worse to worse. At one point he disappeared, and then when he reappeared, he told me that he had been in hospital because he had had a heart attack. And I was walking home to my house, and I was thinking, this is terrible. I'm trying to help this man, other people are trying to help this man, but still, he is dying on the streets of a wealthy city like London. And so I thought, what does this man need? Not a cup of coffee, not a sandwich. He needs skills, training, confidence, support. Now, all of that will cost more money than a coffee. But what if we chip in? What if each of us contribute a little piece? Then we will have enough money to make intelligent investments in the lives of people. And so then I started what is today Beam. And Beam is the world's first crowdfunding platform for homeless people. It allows thousands of people all over the UK and companies to donate, paying for anything that poorest individuals need to progress with their lives, to get into both jobs and both homes. And to answer the question, we partner with government, and now we provide this service to governments, local government throughout London, all the different regions of London, and the central government, and now other cities outside London. They send people to the program, we give them a caseworker, we identify what they need financially, the public pays for those things, and then we support them into jobs at our partner companies and homes at our partner landlords. We've achieved a lot of success with almost 80% of people using the platform to start jobs, and these are people who have been out of work for more than 5 years on average. I will finish just by saying that there are two things that we have learnt through the pandemic. The first is the importance of collaboration. Often with these big problems, there is a tendency to point fingers, to place blame. That doesn't help. What we have built is a much more collaborative platform. The government refer people to us and help cover the costs. The public help pay for the things that people need. The companies hire these people into jobs that they need. And so everyone contributes to this model. And the second thing I've learned is the importance of technology and data. For me, any big and complex problem needs technology and data. Maybe it is the diagnosis of cancer. Maybe it is urban logistics. Maybe it is homelessness. Now, technology and data is not the full answer, not the complete answer, but it is a necessary part of any solution that will be scalable and cheap for everyone and to encourage the greater prosperity of all. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لك أليكس. أشكرك أيضا على التعامل.
جزيلا لك وشكرا لالتزامك بالوقت. Thank you.
Ms. Sara El-Batouti, the founder of Eco Consultant, concerned to provide consultants. What kind of consultation that could be provided through developmental initiatives for the and talk about poverty rates, Excellency, the President August gathering link is very important this year. I will give you an example. Today we will present in COP26. One of the most important topics that were tackled was the smart village, not the smart city. In fact, we know the smart city. They were talking about the smart rural villages. One of the most important issues is that the different sectors and the government to think and to predict problems that may happen. We have the climate change problem. We have a project that we are working in partnership with the Ministry of Planning, and we were very happy. Me, myself, I was very happy in COP26 that this project was tackled as if it's a new discovery. The idea of a smart village, green village, the village where we have a number of simple guidance targeting the housewife. His Excellency, the President, referred to the issue of climate change and Hayat Karima, how to link between both. It's very important to have a number of guidelines thinking about the consumption of water, electricity, the consumption of technologies to be similar to the people, and anyone in the private sector will say that if the product is difficult to be used or its in fact usage is not beneficial, hence it will be useless. Hence, the opportunities that we have in Hayat Karima is to link between these indicators, the needs, prediction, prevention, climate change, how will it affect and impact households, and to provide simple solutions at the level of the household, and to be local as being referred by Mrs. Minova. And these solutions should come from within. I think this is a very important linkage, and many people could in fact be present at different levels, particularly private sector and people at the level of the villages and the houses. This is one of the projects that we are thinking and how to link at different levels. Thank you, Engineer Sara Al-Battuti. The final will be with Michaela Cisna, the head of the institution Prime Global, which interested in providing, in fact, children with determination. His Excellency President Fattah al-Sisi, on one of the occasions allocated for children with special abilities, in fact, a figure was related to statistics about the number of these children, and he said that I don't deal with these figures as a figure, but it is an indicator for families and how we should raise the sufferings from these children and the families. You are responsible. What have changed regarding the support provided to these children and to these mothers after the pandemic? Shukran.
Special thanks to His Excellency the President and to my colleagues here on the panel. So we are all here today in this room because we share the dream of a world where every person has a decent life. And yet there are some children and some women, millions of them around the world, millions of them in Egypt, who have historically not been included in these conversations about development, reducing poverty. The World Bank, UNICEF, and others have repeatedly documented that children are marginalized. But one thing that's not usually spoken to is that their mothers carry a lot of psychological distress for the situation that they're in. And I would like to applaud Hayat Karima for including these children verbally in the video, in the conversations. It's actually quite uncommon for that, usually in conversations around ending poverty and increasing the quality of living for families and poor families. Usually these children are not included, so I would like to applaud that. So Prime Global began as an exploratory project in 2014 to understand how to end poverty for children with disabilities. We were really thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals of no poverty, the very first goal, and at the intersection of children's rights, human rights, women's rights, and ending poverty, you'll find this issue of children with disabilities and their mothers. So what we found was that the best way to end poverty and create a decent life for children with disabilities is to support, equip, and invest in their mothers. In 2017, my work with Prime Global brought me to Cairo, and I participated in a UNICEF project where I led an assessment of the needs and services available to refugee mothers of children with disabilities. And what we found is that what mothers need all over the world, if they have a child with disability, it's very similar. These needs can be categorized into 4 needs. The first one is education. Mothers with children with disabilities usually need education about what their child needs, what their child's disability is, what they are capable of, how to support them. This is something that's usually not included in development programs. The second thing they need is money. Research has shown that giving cash to mothers is one of the most effective ways to elevate a family's status. The third thing they need is social support. Social stigma still remains very high around disability. When you think of the experience that we all have had in the pandemic of being locked down, of not being able to contribute socially in our communities, this is the everyday experience of mothers with children with disabilities all over the world, and the pandemic has certainly worsened that. And the last need that we found is inclusion for their children. Like all parents, excuse me, the families of children with disabilities in all around the world need their children to be included. They want the best for their children. So what we have found in our support program is very similar to Haya Karima, but for this population, in that we attempt to provide support on all levels, multi-dimensional approach. And the support that we provide can be organized into 5 essential components. Cash stipends is the first one, which, as I mentioned, giving cash to mothers is one of the best ways to increase families' economic status. And flexible vocational training. So I know in the video vocational training was mentioned, and I just want to highlight that mothers of children with disabilities often are not able to participate in vocational training for women, women's empowerment programs, unless their child has quality education, quality care during the day. So these things are linked to the need of the children for education and the need of the mother for empowerment. And I will wrap up just by saying that the final 3 components of our program are mothers groups. Not only that mothers need to receive support, but they need to give support. This is something that we all have learned with the pandemic, is that being able to contribute to our community is actually what makes us feel like we are meaningfully a part of our community. And so mothers need that as well. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لك يا ميكيلا سيسني. شكرا لكل
Thank you for our panelists. And now I would like to call His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to talk and to provide the Egyptian vision regarding developmental projects and the huge project regarding Haya Karima. You have the floor, sir. I will try within the 4 minutes. I will try to be brief that you have asked for. Let me at the outset say in the name of Allah, most gracious, most beneficial, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to the panelists for their contribution, wonderful contribution in this regarding this topic, which personally I consider one of the most important topics that we need, all of us need to consider. And let me, through Aya and Sarah, our young people, to congratulate the Egyptian young people as the Egyptian youth. The conference that we are here was one of the ideas of the youth of Egypt, Haya Karima, which is a role model and inspiring model, is considered one of the main ideas of the Egyptians young people. I would like to, in fact, salute them and to commend them and to congratulate them. Let me say something. If you are saying that poverty in our countries or in many countries all over the world, but of course it is concentrated in the African continent. Poverty, in fact, takes countries into dilemmas and problems, which makes it difficult to get out of it. And in fact, if you want to talk about the livelihood of the families, in fact, they go through dilemmas. If you want to talk at the level of the country, yes, we can say it takes the country into dilemma, into backwardness, the maze of backwardness, ignorance, and it is the triangle: poverty, backwardness, ignorance, in fact, and it is difficult for anybody to get out of it easily. And I say that because our young people who are present here I am talking about the youth who are present with us and our guests in our country, should know that this country in 2011 was about to deteriorate and to collapse 10 years ago. And even when we took measures and procedures and elections, and the government and the leadership, in fact, the people couldn't, in fact, bear its performance for a year, and they resented that. Why I'm saying that? Because when we started our responsibility, all we were thinking about was combating poverty in Egypt. Why? How? Through work, sincerely, and to work as much as possible, sincerely, accurately, with the belief that we should do that. I want to tell you very simple figures. It may reflect the size of the work that was exerted and the expenditures. In fact, this is not only my work, it's the work of the Egyptian government. Even the people who are not present with us today, in the last 7 years, the size of expenditure that was spent in order to get out from the maze of poverty, more than 6 billion Egyptian pounds. It was around 400 billion US dollars. I want to say something. We were talking with the companies who worked within the 7 years with one sector. The number of companies were 4,500, and the contracts with about 1,800 billion US dollars. Why I am saying that? While we are talking about the pandemic and its negative impact on the world was celebrating before the pandemic that 1 billion people went out of poverty. Now we are trying to preserve that the 1 billion who went out of poverty not to come back again to poverty, under the poverty line. This has a major and significant impact when we were talking about equilibrium. And you heard that Egypt managed the crisis with equilibrium while taking a temporary lockdown and precautionary measures. We worked non-stop. In fact, why? I do envisage that poverty is much more dangerous. It is a pandemic destroying the future. Poverty is really very dangerous. It destroyed the present and the future, and people wouldn't have hope. Hence, we can see countries full of terrorism, extremism, conflicts, wars, and even revolutions. Why? Because poverty is a serious element. We are not just talking about the pandemic, because in fact, our colleagues on the podium covered most of these issues, but I am talking to say our point of view in Egypt regarding this topic, which is poverty. In fact, a group said that a citizen was inspired by an idea in London. This is very important. In fact, I can say here, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli is talking about 250,000 to 300,000 individual. In fact, we're in a very difficult situation in the streets, very difficult situations and suffering. But we didn't say how we will do this, how we will alleviate this. The concerted efforts between the country and between a fund that we established called the Hayat Karima Fund, Long Live Egypt Fund, and we established around 300,000 housing units. We established this, and we will be working in this direction till we reach 1 million housing units. What I'm saying here are the figures are huge financially. The objective is we will not look backward, but we will move forward in order to get out of the poverty cycle. We said that we have multidimensional poverty. What I will do, just to provide the money as a state, or as a state to take integrated measures and procedures to deal and to overcome this multidimensional poverty that have been mentioned. not good education, not good health, not good transportation, not good housing. What's have been saying about Hayat Karima? I don't want to leave housing, the 300,000 housing units or 200,000 to 50,000. We are preparing them and we are furnishing them in a state with a humble economic situation. We are not a rich country. We are not one of the rich countries when we talk about the United States, United Kingdom, France. These are rich countries. I am talking as a state. But when we did this as a state, we didn't say that that we will not be able to serve these citizens. No, we didn't say that. We said that we will face our poverty and we will build these housing units and we will furnish it appropriately and decently in order to get them out from the status they were living in. In fact, I am saying this for the organizers of the conference, give opportunity for our young guests to be acknowledged of our experience, to benefit from it. I am talking about more than 300,000 housing units with 3 rooms. Not just 1 room or 2 rooms, 3 rooms, because the number of our families is a little bit big. So what I would like to say here, that we in Egypt moved since 7 years and we will be working in order to get out of this poverty cycle in Egypt. We will work non-stop. When the pandemic came and we said in estimating the situation of the country, and every country deal with the pandemic according to its own specificity, and we are not like other countries, and also the impact on the pandemic also different from other countries. So we said we'll be taking precautionary measures and the guidelines from the Ministry of Health. They are our citizens and we need to take care of them and to protect them. Yes, we took the necessary precautionary health measures and to mitigate and as mentioned by Dr. Hala, yes, we supported sectors that were affected by the pandemic, tourism sector, to launch initiatives with, in fact, incentives with 1 billion Egyptian pounds. This was very early, and many countries worldwide did not move while we did.
So we started moving by providing 100 billion Egyptian pounds in order to preserve the enterprises that were already existent, with one condition, that they do not have any that they don't fire any of their employees because of the conditions of the pandemic. This was not acceptable. So I just want to tell you something. Egypt is a youthful nation. We have tens of millions of people who work. So if they have no jobs, where are they going to have incomes from? And the state won't be able to provide like unemployment benefits for all of them. So should we provide these benefits or jobs? We chose jobs because jobs will lead to 2 things. First, they will sustain the flow of money to the workers. Second, throughout the past 2 years, our country developed with unprecedented rates. Hadn't we done that, we would have started working after the pandemic had passed. So our experience is different. It is different. We said that we are going to move on with work. We're going to alleviate the pandemic impacts economically, and that we will be very strict with the precautionary health measures. And if we need to have a temporary lockdown, we would do it, and that was what happened actually. And I don't want to repeat what has already been said about Haya Karima. But I just want to conclude by telling you that everything that we do in Egypt is just one step of 1,000 steps that we will be taking. It's just one step of still 1,000 steps that lie ahead. So this is not just rhetorical. This is actually a real assessment of our status. We need to be able to confront what's happening in our country. I'm telling this to all the youth of the world. We need to have a real assessment of the status quo. And by the way, what I'm telling you is the manifestation of the communication between the state and the people. We don't hide anything from our people. We're being very honest and frank. So when we started the economic reform, as has been mentioned, this was a measure that everybody was scared from. We considered the reaction and the response of the people. I'm talking about those that took place in November 2016. But here in this conference, in this forum, I would like to salute and pay my respects to the people of Egypt. Because this is no secret. When we were discussing this at the smaller level in the cabinet, all the ministries were fearful, they were reluctant, and they know what I'm about to say. I bet on the Egyptian people, and I bet on Egyptian women in particular, and I said that this program will be passed, people will accept it, people will bear it. And by the way, this is... And hadn't we done that at that time, we would have had a huge catastrophe had we been hit by the pandemic without us being ready for it. This economic reform and how Egyptians bore it and shouldered its responsibility allowed us to pass through the pandemic, the health crisis, and other crises as well. So the poverty that you say 60% of which is in our countries deserves that we lose sleep over countering it by work, and even more work. And by the way, yesterday, I had a meeting with the international organizations, and I spoke about credit, soft loans for African countries are very important because risks in Africa and threats in Africa are numerous. And so banks that provide loans, usually their credit risks are high. So the rich are able to take low-cost loans, and those who are destitute receive loans with very high costs and very high interest rates. This way, we will never be able to get out of poverty, because now it's a very difficult equation. So loans bring even more burdens and more costs, and this keeps them poor as they are. peoples have the right to dream, and so they begin to revolt. There would be instability, the nations would be destroyed, the flows of irregular migration start, going to other stable countries just to be able to have a life. Let's provide life to those who are most vulnerable. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, please, if you allow me, in regards to promoting the Haya Karima project, there were many preparatory workshops before the actual inauguration of the World Youth Forum, especially for this purpose. Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
تم نقل الجلسة الخاصة بدور المؤسسات الدولية في دعم التعافي من تداعيات الجائحة إلى قاعة سيناء في نفس التوقيت المحدد لها 12:30 الظهر، على أن تعقد جلسة المسؤولية الدولية لإعادة الإعمار مناطق النزاعات في القاعة الرئيسية في نفس التوقيت الساعة 12:30. شكرا جزيلا لحضرتك.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Les activités de la 4e édition du Forum mondial de la jeunesse se poursuivent aujourd'hui pour la 3e journée consécutive à Sharm el-Sheikh. On vient justement d'assister à une séance ayant pour thème les initiatives de développement face à la pauvreté. C'est la ministre de la Planification et du Développement économique, Dr Hala El-Saïd, qui a affirmé que les agendas internationaux et africains ainsi que l'agenda de l'Égypte sont d'accord sur la nécessité de lutter contre la pauvreté, justement comme moyen pour sortir de cette pauvreté. Au cours de son mot devant la séance intitulée « Les initiatives de développement »